The 9,534th meeting of the Security Council is resumed. I now wish to give the floor to the representative of Mauritania.
Thank you, President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the member state of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in my capacity as a chair of OIC Group. Allow me at the outset to welcome and congratulate the newly elected non-permanent member of the UN Security Council for the term 24-25, looking forward to jointly working with this august UN organ for meaningful action to strengthen and maintain international peace and security and to ensure respect for the values and the resolution of the United Nations. Our appreciation goes to non-permanent member states who have successfully completed their term. We extend our heartfelt congratulations to the newly elected member with the special recognition for Algeria, Guyana, and Sierra Leone, the esteemed member of our organization. May their upcoming tenure be marked by the success and fruitful accomplishment. Mr. President, this meeting is convened once again to address the grave situation unfolding in the occupied Palestinian territory, particularly in the Gaza Strip, due to the ongoing Israeli brutal aggression against the Palestinian people for the past 109 days, and which has resulted so far in the loss of thousands of innocent lives, tens of thousands of injured, civilian destruction of vital civilian infrastructure, and forced displacement for the majority of population in Gaza Strip, in blatant violation of international humanitarian law and relevant UN resolution. The atrocity being committed by Israeli occupied forces akin to genocide act are reminiscent of the darkest scene and memory in human history, such as the ethnic cleansing and acting that amount to genocide witnessed during the Palestinian 1984 catastrophic Nakba. The deliberate and indiscriminate killing and maiming of about 100,000 of innocent Palestinian civilians, including women and children, is a testament that the genocide intent behind this act. The wanton destruction of residential buildings, schools, hospital, and UNRWA facility further underscores the systematic Israeli persistent in eradicating the Palestinian people, national, ethnic, and religious identity. This required indeed immediate attention and intervention of this esteemed body. In the same vein, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, firmly rejects any attempt to alter the democratic composition of Gaza Strip through forced displacement. The suffering endured by the Palestinian population, with about 90% of the population have been displaced and faced with the constant threat of death, in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law, amount to a war crime. In addition, Israelis' obstruction of aid workers and the denial of essential supplies such as food, water, electricity, medicine, and shelter exacerbate the humanitarian crisis and constitute heinous crime that demand urgent intervention on humanitarian, legal, and political front. Mr. President, the escalating Israeli aggression, violence, and incursion in the West Bank, coupled with the settler attacks against Palestinian civilians, exacerbate their suffering and pose a grave risk of further deterioration of peace and stability in the region and beyond. Reports show that since 7 October 2023, about 350 Palestinian civilians have been killed and 5,800 injustified detained. This international community must strongly condemn this human rights violation, put an end to these criminal acts, and hold those responsible accountable for their crimes. Furthermore, the OIC draw attention to the disturbing report of abuse, ill-treatment, collective punishment, torture, and violence perpetrated against Palestinian detained. The plight of more than 11,000 Palestinian detained included 5,800 who were arrested since 7 October 2023, and the death of 7 prisoners within Israeli jails, demand independent investigation into this violation and require enforcement of international humanitarian law, particularly the 4th Geneva Convention, in order to protect the human rights of Palestinian detainees in compliance with the role of international humanitarian law. In addition to the Israeli assault on dozens of mosques and churches in Gaza Strip, illegal Israeli action violating the sanctity of Al-Aqsa Mosque continue unabated. Report shows that more than 50,000 Israeli settlers stormed into Al-Aqsa Mosque in 2023 under the protection of Israeli forces, while illegal act of suppressing, assaulting, terrorizing, and banning Muslim worshippers from reaching Al-Aqsa Mosque were strictly imposed in blatant violation of the right to freedom of religion and belief in their international humanitarian law. Mr. President, the IOC deeply regrets that the fact this august body has so far failed to adopt needed international resolution toward the protection of Palestinian civilians as the primary UN body tasked with protection, global peace, security, and justice. The Security Council must do more to enforce its own resolution, prevent further crimes of aggression, and acts that amount to genocide, and ensure Israeli respect for and compliance with its obligation under international law. In response to this current heinous and unprecedented Israeli aggression against Palestinian civilians, a joint Arab and Islamic summit took place on 11 November 2023 in Riyadh, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This meeting adopted a resolution demanding an immediate cessation of Israeli military aggression, lifting of the Israeli siege, delivery of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, and compelling Israel, the occupying power, to abide by international law. Mr. President, we call for an immediate and decisive action by this august body to halt the ongoing brutal Israeli aggression and impunity, and assure accountability for Israel, the occupying power, for its crime against humanity and illegal blockade on Gaza Strip. This included the need to provide international protection for Palestinian people and open humanitarian corridors, allow vital supply for medicine, food, and basic necessity to reach Gaza Strip. In closing, the OIC stressed that security and stability in Palestine could only be achieved through the implementation of international resolution that would lead to ending the Israeli colonial occupation and enabling the Palestinian people to achieve their legitimate right to return to self-determination. This is in addition to the realization of sovereign and independent state of Palestine over all the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, based on the vision of two-state solution, the relevant UN resolution, and the Arab Peace Initiative. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Mauritania for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Cuba.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, we endorse the statement delivered by Namibia on behalf of the chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. It's time to stop Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. We reiterate our unequivocal demand for an immediate ceasefire and an end to the belligerent rhetoric. The urgent mobilization of emergency humanitarian aid under UN coordination is essential to address the catastrophic situation in Gaza. The summit of non-aligned movement and the South-South summit held recently in Kampala unequivocally stated the very same. We demand that the United States government stop paralyzing the United Nations Security Council. This body must fulfill its mandate as soon as possible to stop the collective punishment being carried out by Israel, the occupying power, against the Palestinian population, and put an end to the escalating violence and massacre in Gaza. History will hold the United States government accountable for its repeated complicit veto, which guarantees impunity for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the occupying power. Mr. President, the root causes of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which did not begin on October 7, 2023, must be addressed without delay. It is urgent that this Security Council enforce its own resolutions to end the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. This body cannot remain inert in the face of Israel's illegal annexation policy, all of its colonizing practices, and its apartheid system, which have persisted for more than 7 decades in the occupied Palestinian territory, in flagrant violation of the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter and international law. Nothing can justify such actions. A comprehensive, just and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on the creation of 2 states, which would allow the Palestinian people to exercise their right to self-determination and to have an independent and sovereign state within pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, and which would also guarantee the right of return of refugees, can wait no longer. We consider it essential to convene as a matter of urgency a peace conference under the auspices of the United Nations in order to preserve the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. The admission of the State of Palestine as a fully fledged member of the United Nations can be delayed no longer. Mr. President, we reaffirm Cuba's willingness to contribute to legitimate international efforts to put an end to the current situation. We support South Africa's case before the International Court of Justice against Israel in relation to that country's violations of its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, to which Cuba is a state party. We reiterate the proposal presented by our country at the recent 19th summit of the Non-Aligned Movement to send urgently an international protection mission to the Gaza Strip. This mission should be authorized by the United Nations General Assembly and mandated to ensure the safety and protection of the civilian population and facilitate the delivery of emergency humanitarian aid, including water and food. We roundly condemn the unprecedented killing of staff of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, known as UNRWA, and the killing of refugees being sheltered under the UN flag. We will continue to support the extraordinary humanitarian work of that agency. In line with this position, we call for compliance with Resolution 78/251 presented by our delegation on behalf of the Group of 77 and China to the 5th Committee of the General Assembly, which was supported by the vast majority of member states. Mr. President, resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will contribute to the stability and peace of the entire Middle East region. An end to other Israeli abuses in the region, supported by the United States, would also contribute to this noble goal. We demand the total and unconditional withdrawal of Israel from the Syrian Golan and all occupied Arab territories. Aggressions against Syria, which violate its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and external interference in that sister Arab nation must cease. We support the search for a peaceful and negotiated solution to the situation imposed on it. We condemn the military attacks by the United States and its NATO allies in Yemen in violation of international law. Acts of this nature encourage the spread of war and genocide in the Gaza Strip. Violence is not the solution to the conflicts in the Middle East. We reiterate our strong condemnation of the terrorist attack perpetrated in Kerman during the ceremony commemorating the 4th anniversary of the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. We express our solidarity with the Iranian people and government. Our heartfelt condolences go to the families of the victims. We demand an immediate and unconditional end to the arbitrary and illegal unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States against sovereign nations in the Middle East. Let us stop the double standard, selectivity, and political manipulation that undermine the cause of international peace and security. The Security Council must put itself at the service of the peoples of the United Nations and not at the spurious interests of the war machine. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Cuba for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I congratulate France on having convened this high-level debate, which once again has drawn the international community's attention.
President, it has been decades since the present item in the Council's agenda was first considered. There is a need to go beyond wishful declarations and engage in dialogue and compromises that translate into action. As never before, there is a need for real diplomacy and true political will that enable effective multilateral action. The Middle East peace process has long been stalled, not by itself, but by deliberate actions from different sides. Now we are witnessing the cruelest war, one that seriously threatens the prospect of a peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. Let me repeat what Brazil has been urging this Council to achieve for far too long: an immediate ceasefire in Gaza before nothing else is left to be saved. That is the urgent call from the international community, translated in powerful General Assembly resolutions passed in the face of Security Council inaction. Its implementation is long overdue. As stated by the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs earlier this month, what has been unfolding in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory is a war with almost no regard for the impact on civilians. A ceasefire is necessary to protect civilians not only from indiscriminate or disproportionate military assaults, but also from death by hunger and disease. The feasibility of humanitarian action and life-saving assistance in Gaza, as determined by United Nations Security Council resolutions 2712 and 2720, depends on it. Regrettably, alongside with relentless large-scale military operations, undue restrictions and delays to the entry of humanitarian aid in Gaza reported by UN agencies compound the hardship of civilians, in blatant disregard for international humanitarian law. The provisional measures requested by South Africa to the International Court of Justice with the aim of preventing the risk of genocide by requiring, quote, the immediate suspension of military operations in and against Gaza, unquote, are most urgent and needed. The requested pronouncement by the principal judicial body of the United Nations not only may enable the necessary humanitarian relief and save civilian lives, but it can also contribute to creating an environment conducive to the restoration of political dialogue and to the resumption of negotiations aimed at the two-state solution. Mr. President, a call for a ceasefire in Gaza does not tackle the root causes of the conflict, as is necessary for durable peace in the region. Nevertheless, a ceasefire now is possibly the only alternative that can preserve the international community's ability to do so thereafter. There can be no military solution to the deeply rooted causes of tension and hostility. Further military action will only deepen resentments, hatred, and ultimately perpetuate the cycle of violence with detrimental effects for the whole region and the world. Beyond Gaza, in the West Bank, in the Red Sea, in Yemen, across the blue line between Israel and Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, and of course also in Israel, the escalation of hostilities and new security incidents seem directly related to this growing sentiment of distrust and outright disregard for international law, prompted by our collective inability to avoid the tragedy in Gaza, ensure accountability, and pave the way for a true and effective peace process. There is no alternative other than advancing decisively towards the two-state solution, with the Palestinian state living side by side with Israel in peace and security within mutually agreed and internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
شكرا جزيلا سيد الرئيس Thank you, Mr. President. We align ourselves with statements by the OIC and the Arab Group. I would like to congratulate the French Republic for assuming the presidency of the Council this month. We thank France for its efforts in facilitating the holding of this extraordinary session. I would like to congratulate the newly elected Council members, Algeria, the Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Guyana, and Slovenia, who will serve on the Council in 2024-2025. We wish them all success. I welcome the participation of ministers in this meeting in light of its importance and added value, as the systematic Israeli aggression on the Palestinian people persists. We thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for his briefing presented yesterday. Mr. President, in October 2023, Israeli occupation forces started their aggression against the Palestinian people in Gaza. They've been using various types of weapons, resorting to indiscriminate shelling by land, sea, and air, and claiming the lives of thousands of children, women, and the elderly. They've been destroying infrastructure, schools, hospitals, places of worship. They've been cutting off water and energy supplies. They've been closing border crossings and imposing a siege, collective punishment, and forcibly displacing people. The Security Council has not been able to fulfill its legal responsibility in maintaining international peace and security. Many times it has been unable to stop these massacres and the genocide perpetrated by Israeli occupation forces. This led to the deterioration of the humanitarian situation. We now are facing a true humanitarian disaster. As the Secretary General has said, it is an unprecedented situation because of the intensity of military operations, and this all will have effects on international and regional peace and security. I take this opportunity to express my appreciation to the United Nations and humanitarian agencies who have been on the ground providing assistance. They continued with their humanitarian action in very difficult circumstances. Despite the loss of lives, as we know, UN staff has paid the ultimate price. Israeli occupation forces have been ignoring calls for a ceasefire. The vast majority of member states have voted in favor of two extraordinary resolutions adopted at the extraordinary session of the General Assembly to stop this aggression, to reach a ceasefire. We hope that this call by the majority of member states will be responded to. We hope that the dignity of the Palestinian people will be maintained, and we hope that Israel will be held accountable for its crimes. Mr. President, Iraq is cognizant that the crises in the Middle East are interconnected. The latest developments in the occupied Palestinian territories will have serious repercussions on the Middle East as a whole. Iraq, since the beginning of this aggression, this unjust war launched by Israeli occupation forces on the Gaza Strip, has made multiple warnings. If these practices by Israel persist, if the Security Council doesn't shoulder its responsibility, the situation will exacerbate and the repercussions will not stop at the borders of Gaza and the Palestinian territories. The specter of war will be looming. Calls for ending the war by the Secretary General and by leaders of the world have been ignored, and the aggressive behavior of Israel persists and is even being supported by a number of states. Expanding the conflict will not provide a solution. The solution lies in the Security Council shouldering its responsibility, adopting a resolution to stop this aggressive war against Palestinians in Gaza. Mr. President, the government of Iraq expresses its full support and appreciation to the Secretary General of the United Nations for his principled position contained in his letter to the Security Council, his position regarding the flagrant violations in Gaza. Iraq stresses that the humanitarian disasters as a result of this aggression led to a humanitarian tragedy, which requires immediate international action. International efforts must be made to stop a spillover of this war. What happened in Gaza on the 7th of October cannot be regarded in isolation of the accumulated violations by Israeli forces in the Palestinian territories, the aggressive campaigns launched by Israel usurping lands and violating holy places for more than 7 decades. In these circumstances, the Palestinian question cannot be changed and reduced to a question regarding displacement and humanitarian crisis. This is why the international community must take tangible measures to end this suffering. We call upon the international community to show its solidarity and to call upon Israel, the occupying power, to stop its aggression against the Palestinian people and to comply with international resolutions. Iraq supports the case filed by South Africa at the ICJ because of the crime of genocide. This is an important step towards a ceasefire, towards accountability, towards justice and the end of occupation. Iraq looks forward to the role played by Ms. Sigrid Kaag on the ground to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid without obstacles and in a safe way. We call for providing all kinds of facilitations to Ms. Kaag so that she's able to fulfill its role in implementation of Security Council Resolution 2720. It is important to establish a monitoring mechanism by the United Nations to facilitate and monitor the entry of humanitarian aid to Palestinian territories. Mr. President, the Republic of Iraq, since the beginning of the Israeli aggression, has sent food aid, humanitarian aid, and medical supplies to the Palestinian people in Gaza via the Arish airport in Egypt. This aid has been provided by the Iraqi Red Crescent via the Egyptian Red Crescent to the Palestinian Red Crescent. And we have provided gas also to the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, we once again express our support to the Palestinian people and its right to self-determination and the establishment of a Palestinian state on Palestinian territories. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Iraq for their long statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Portugal. Thank you, President, and thank you also for the convening of this debate.
Since the last open debate on the situation in the Middle East, the violence is spreading across the region. Hostages are still being held captive by Hamas. The suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza is unprecedented. The territory is becoming unlivable, and the anger is on the rise, laying down the foundations for future waves of youth being radicalized among both Israelis and Palestinians. Once again, Portugal would like to reiterate its unequivocal condemnation of the terrorist attacks by Hamas, reaffirm its solidarity with Israel and its right to self-defense. We demand the unconditional release of all hostages and the direct access to the International Committee of the Red Cross to the remaining captives. Terrorism is not admissible in any circumstances. At the same time, we continue to witness a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza, and we must be vocal in rejecting the normalization of the suffering of the Palestinian people. After more than 100 days of war, there is no place for waging war against an entire population. Collective punishment of civilian population is contrary to international humanitarian law, and preventing further loss of life is a pressing priority. We have just heard the staggering numbers the Secretary General brought us here yesterday. This level of destruction is unprecedented, and the civilian population in Gaza is defenseless, both against Hamas and Israel. Furthermore, the basic tenets of international humanitarian law are not compatible with constraints to the necessary flow of food, water, electricity, and fuel to Gaza. We are deeply alarmed by the risk of having even more Palestinians dying from hunger and disease than the ones that have already died under the bombings. We need immediate implementation of UN Security Council resolutions 2720 and 2712. Rapid, safe, unhindered, expanded, and sustained humanitarian access to Gaza must take place now. This implies the urgent need for creating the conditions for a permanent ceasefire. We maintain the view that our collective priority should be the protection of civilians and addressing the humanitarian situation on the ground. Accordingly, Portugal contributed with 10 million euros for humanitarian relief of the Palestinians, as announced at the humanitarian conference held in Paris last November. That contribution reflects our position towards this conflict. We stand on the side of humanity. Therefore, we reiterate our support to Secretary General Antonio Guterres' calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We commend the extraordinary commitment of the UN workers on the ground, and we reject any attempt to undermine the UN credibility and authority. Political narratives play a decisive role in shaping public opinions. Hence, we condemn any statement or message that implies the relocation of Palestinians, and we condemn the widespread violence of radical settlers against Palestinians in the West Bank and Jerusalem. Not holding these acts accountable is inconsistent with the rule of law. Finally, we must do all we can to prevent a spillover of this conflict across the region. Therefore, we call for more actions conducive to de-escalate the situation in south of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and the Red Sea. We call as well for maximum restraint. It is time to bring back the diplomatic track. Mr. President, we must address the structural drivers of this conflict. We must bring hope in the future for the Palestinian people and meet the security concerns of Israel. This must be done through a new impetus to the peace process, building, among others, on the Arab Peace Initiative. And this requires trust and will to engage in meaningful negotiations. We know what we aim for, peace in the region based on a two-state solution. This is the only way forward. Let us now lay down the conditions to achieve that goal. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Portugal for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of St. Lucia.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I have the honor to deliver this intervention on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. Allow me to extend our appreciation to the Secretary General, Guterres, for his remarks at yesterday's open debate. Mr. President, CARICOM is deeply concerned over the unrelenting hostilities in the Gaza Strip, which threaten an already delicate region and breeds fear, mistrust, and disillusionment about the possibility of a two-state solution as provided for in Security Council Resolution 242. The statistics are stark. Since October 7th, over 23,000 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza Strip, with over 85% of the population being displaced, some multiple times. Although the situation is grim, CARICOM maintains hope that where there is a convergence of strong political will and unity, a solution can be achieved. However, a precondition to this is the implementation of an immediate ceasefire. Without it, the resulting death and devastation wrought in the Gaza Strip would further delay the possibility for peaceful coexistence. To this end, we reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire that would facilitate the parties' return to the negotiating table, a necessary step in building trust. We further underscore that the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages would also operate as a confidence-building mechanism. alongside efforts towards a ceasefire, is the need for permanent, unhindered, and unconditional passage of humanitarian aid at levels commensurate with the overwhelming needs. This is the only way to assuage the symptoms of a conflict, the brunt of which is borne by innocent civilians. Within this context, CARICOM takes this opportunity to recognize the commitments made by the United Nations, including the UN Relief Agency and Work Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, as well as humanitarian partners working in these hazardous conditions. We underscore that even conflicts have rules to which all parties are equally bound. We therefore call on both sides to comply with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, particularly as it pertains to the conduct of hostilities, protection of civilians and civilian objects, humanitarian access, and the protection of humanitarian personnel and their freedom of movement. In this vein, we also call on all parties to respect their obligations enshrined within the resolutions adopted by the Security Council, including resolutions 2720 and 2712. Mr. President, as we conclude, we appeal to the members of the Security Council to work constructively to ensure that Gaza, already described by the Secretary General as a graveyard for children, does not descend into a charnel house. Discord need not preclude durable solutions. We trust that the Council would prioritize the needs and well-being of the civilians to positively impact the situation so that both sides could work towards the vision outlined in Resolution 242, which remains the cornerstone of peace in the region. To this end, CARICOM reiterates its unwavering commitment to Resolution 242, emphasizing that both Palestinians and Israelis deserve to exist side by side in peace and within secure and recognized borders. Mr. President, on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, I thank you.
I thank the representative of St. Lucia for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Bangladesh.
Mr. President, I thank the French presidency for organizing this important debate. I also thank the Secretary General for his comprehensive briefing. My delegation aligns itself with the statement delivered by Mauritania on behalf of the OIC group. Mr. President, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is staggering, with over 25,000 Palestinians have been killed and more than 66,000 injured since October 7, 2023. Heartbreakingly, an alarming 70% of those killed are women and children. 1.9 million people have been displaced, forced from their homes as a result of widespread destruction. The toll extends beyond mere numbers. It represents the shattered families, broken lives, and a community grappling with unimaginable losses and pains. Relentless Israeli bombardment spared nothing: hospitals, schools, religious sites, all demolished. The loss of 153 UNRWA personnel is not just a statistic. It marks the highest number of casualties among UN personnel in its history. It serves as yet another stark example of indiscriminate brutality by Israel. And the aggression, killings, and genocide by Israel have been continuing unabated. Regrettably, we must acknowledge one more time that we, the United Nations, especially this Council, have miserably fallen short in preventing the indiscriminate bombing in Gaza and the tragic loss of civilian lives. Adding to the tragedy, Palestinians are now facing critical shortage of basic necessities like food, water, and medicine, and our efforts to ensure vital humanitarian assistance have proven insufficient. Life of the civilians are being used as weapons of war, and it continues. Even after securing the support from the two-thirds majority of the General Assembly for an immediate ceasefire, we have failed, as all the efforts have been blocked in this Security Council through the use of veto power, disregarding the will of international community. Mr. President, Israel must be held accountable for its flagrant violations of international norms and principles, international human rights and humanitarian laws, as well as other obligations prescribed in the relevant UN resolutions. In this regard, we commend South Africa for seeking provisional measures for the International Court of Justice. Bangladesh stands in full support of South Africa's initiative and urge every member state to do the same. Moreover, support to the ongoing investigation by the International Criminal Court is also critical. Palestine issue has reached at its catastrophic stage due to the culture of impunity being enjoyed by Israel for decades. It is more urgent than ever to hold Israel accountable for its genocidal act and aggressions. Mr. President, we urge for rapid, safe, unhindered, expanded, and sustained humanitarian access in Gaza to ensure necessary life-saving assistance. We refer to the Security Council Resolution 2720 and welcome the appointment of Ms. Sigrid Kaag as Senior Humanitarian Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza. We urge the Council to implement this resolution and other resolutions of the Security Council regarding Palestine. Mr. President, we once again urge this Council to take immediate measures to stop the Israeli attack in Gaza without delay, and also to bring an end of decades-long Israeli occupation and aggression against Palestine. In this regard, we would like to repeat that the only solution of this crisis, the only way to establish peace in Palestine and the whole region, is to establish an independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital under a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders. In this connection, we wish to express our full support to Palestine's full membership of the United Nations at the earliest. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Bangladesh for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Sayyid Rais.
Mr. President, the delegation of the Syrian Arab Republic associates itself with a statement delivered by the Kingdom of Bahrain on behalf of the Arab group, and we wish to deliver the following statement in our national capacity. The grave developments in the Middle East region as a result of Israeli barbaric operations which are ongoing against the Palestinian people for more than 100 days, and the repeated attacks targeting Syrian territory are but a drop in the bucket in the manifold Israeli crimes that date back more than 75 years. This reflects the well-entrenched tendency in the Israeli entity to destroy more than 225,000 Palestinians, most of whom were women and children, have been killed up to this date. More than 80% of homes were destroyed in the north and center of the Gaza Strip. The displacement of the Palestinian people outside of their lands and to liquidate the Palestinian cause. That is the aim. The Israeli occupying power is continuing its inhumane blockade of Gaza, is preventing the delivery of humanitarian assistance, is using prohibited weapons prohibited under international law, including phosphorus weapons, increasing their threats of use of the nuclear bomb. There includes war crimes, crimes against humanity, including the crime of genocide. And this is in a manner that is in flagrant contempt of international principles and international law. Mr. President, it is outrageous that the United States and some European countries have been attempting to legitimize, to legalize the Israeli aggression against Gaza by placing it under the banner of legitimate defense, and by thereby by making the executioners into victims, the silence of the U.S. and allies in the light of Israeli crimes against the Palestinian people and the obstacles that they have erected to prevent the Security Council from delivering upon its mandate and ending the crimes. These are all factors which shed light on the false allegations of those states who claim to seek to uphold human rights, and they also unmask the lies circulating around my country, Syria, for years. And here I wish to ask those who, for all of these years, have turned a blind eye to the litany of these crimes against civilians, the delivery of humanitarian assistance and guarantee of non-impunity. Could you have the same principles in upholding and protecting Palestinian people against the Israeli war machine? What of accountability for Israel? How is it possible for the Israeli army not to be held accountable for its crimes against the Palestinian people? My country calls upon the Security Council to adopt effective and immediate measures to end the suffering endured by the Palestinian people, to end Israeli persistent attacks, and to deliver humanitarian urgent support, and to prevent the forced displacement of people, and to guarantee that Israel and sponsors be held accountable for its acts, and for them to no longer be able to operate in complete impunity. In this regard, our country welcomes the step of South Africa against Israel vis-a-vis the ICC in light of the grave violation of the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the crime of genocide. Mr. President, as part of the same policy of aggression, in the same vein, this policy pursued by the Israeli authorities against the occupied Arab territory since the occupation of the Golan since 1977, there have been heinous violations of international law as well as international humanitarian law. This includes attempts inter alia to change the demographic composition and institutional structure of the Syrian-occupied Golan with the establishment and erection of additional settlements and increase in the number of settlers and the confiscation of lands to carry out projects and this, including wind turbines. This is an attempt to impose Israeli nationality on the people there, and this is also compounded by the plunder of natural resources and the persistent closure since 2014 of the Konetra crossing, which is the only way to allow the residents of the occupied Golan to communicate with their families and their relatives in their homeland, Syria. In pursuit of this hostile policy, Israel continues to repeatedly attack the Syrian territory with targeting of residential areas and key infrastructure, including ports and airports. The most recent attack was on 20 January, targeting a residential building in a neighborhood of Damas. These are recurrent attacks targeting the Syrian Arab Republic. There are persistent threats against states in the region. All of this unequivocally sheds light on the expansionist policies of the Israeli occupying power, flouting the rights of people in the occupied territory. The Syrian Arab Republic warns Israel and its sponsors against the continuation of these aggressive policies, which can result in further fanning of flames in the entire region with a global escalation that will jeopardize peace and security both at the regional and international levels. And we urge the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility and to strive to immediately end the occupation of the Arab territories and to ensure implementation of the relevant resolutions of the Security Council, specifically Resolution 242, Resolution 338, as well as Resolution 497, which considered the decision of Israel to annex the Golan as null and invalid with no legal validity. To conclude, Mr. President, I wish to emphasize that the European Union delegation has exploited this council to raise issues related to the situation in Syria. This has nothing to do with the theme of today's meeting. This is an attempt to divert attention from the crimes being perpetrated by Israel in the region and the misguided policies of the European Union, which have continued to fan the flames of the crisis in Syria and to worsen the suffering of our people. Nonetheless, given the magnitude of the tragedy in Palestine and in respect for the Council, my country will reserve the right to response and will respond at a later meeting. Thank you.
I now give the floor to the representative of Cambodia.
Mr. President, Excellency, Distinguished Delegate, first may I express my appreciation to you, Mr. President, for convening today's debate under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. It has been more than 100 days since the conflict began on October the 7th, 2023, resulting in thousands of civilian casualties and enormous destruction in Gaza. It is very unfortunate to see that the war is still going on. Without a ceasefire, many more innocent lives will be lost, not only to gunfire, but also to a lack of treatment for the injured and sick, disease, and food shortage. Mr. President, when one decides something very badly, one should not be shy in talking the same again and again. So allow me to reiterate my delegation view as follows. First, while welcoming the 4 resolutions, 2 adopted by the Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly and 2 adopted by the Security Council, Cambodia called on all relevant parties to the conflict to implement this resolution to save people's lives, prevent the spillover in the region, and achieve a ceasefire. Second, to allow the 2 nations to live in harmony, it is of utmost importance to seek and address the root cause of the Palestine-Israel conflict. Cambodia urged all parties to exercise utmost restraint, constructively engage in dialogue, and resolve conflict through diplomacy and peaceful means to end the humanitarian crisis and achieve enduring peace. Recently at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Mr. Secretary General Guterres repeated a valid view about the urgent need to build trust to get the 2-state solution moving forward. Third, the life and safety of all civilians must be protected from harm in conflict. Therefore, my delegation urged all sides not to target civilian and civilian infrastructure and to cease fire in order to allow humanitarian access for the delivery of essential aid to those in need under international humanitarian law. To conclude, Mr. President, Cambodia would like to join others in calling for the unconditional release of all hostages. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Cambodia for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, President. Ireland aligns itself with the statement of the European Union delivered yesterday. Today's debate comes over 100 days since the beginning of this war. The situation on the ground in Gaza is becoming increasingly desperate. The level of civilian deaths is wholly unacceptable. The amount of humanitarian aid and supplies reaching civilians in Gaza is wholly inadequate. As stated by the Secretary-General yesterday, the entire population of Gaza is enduring destruction at a scale and speed without parallel in recent history. The adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 2720 was a step in the right direction, but it did not go far enough. It is now manifestly clear that the situation on the ground demands an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We therefore urge this Security Council to call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in line with the overwhelming view of the international community. Ireland thanks the Secretary-General for his frank assessment of the situation given yesterday. In so doing, we'd also like to acknowledge and thank those UN staff who are working on the front line in Gaza. We also express our heartfelt condolences to the families of those who have been killed. Ireland is shocked that a sustained campaign of disinformation and delegitimization is directed towards UN organisations, particularly UNRWA, as well as the ICRC. It is vital that this campaign ceases and that Israel instead moves to foster a more constructive relationship with these organisations. President, Ireland has consistently condemned the attacks launched by Hamas on and since the 7th of October. The rape and murder of civilians, destruction of civilian property, taking of hostages, use of human shields, and firing of indiscriminate rockets at urban centres are serious violations of international humanitarian law, for which those involved must be held responsible. We have called for and continue to call for all hostages to be released immediately and unconditionally. However, it is equally beholden upon all of us to recall that international law limits the use of force in self-defence to no more than is necessary and proportionate. No more. Ireland's view is that these limits are being exceeded, as illustrated by the unacceptable death toll and the massive destruction of property, including homes throughout Gaza, the displacement of up to 2 million people, and the ensuing humanitarian catastrophe to which we have referred. Furthermore, international humanitarian law requires that in any armed conflict, military operations must respect the principles of distinction, proportionality and precaution. Ireland is increasingly concerned that the use of heavy munitions with a wide blast area cannot be limited to military objectives located in heavily populated urban centres and is therefore indiscriminate. Their use in these circumstances unavoidably leads to the extensive destruction of nearby civilian property and loss of civilian life. The use of these munitions must stop and must stop now. President, Ireland reiterates that we must take concrete steps to achieve long-term peace, stability and security for Palestinians and Israelis alike and for the region as a whole. This can only be done through a sustained and serious commitment to a two-state solution. And this requires genuine political will. The rejection by Prime Minister Netanyahu of the perspective for a sovereign Palestinian state is not acceptable. In February of last year, the UN Security Council reaffirmed its unwavering commitment to the vision of the two-state solution where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace within secure and recognised borders consistent with international law and relevant UN resolutions. As I say, the UN Security Council reaffirmed its unwavering commitment to this vision. Today, the achievement of this vision is more pressing than ever. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ireland for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Maldives.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank France, President of the Council for the month of January, for convening this important open debate on the Middle East. I also wish to congratulate and welcome the newly elected members on the Council, Algeria, South Korea, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and Slovenia. It is heartening to see Guyana, a fellow small island developing state, on the Council. I have no doubt that you will continue to champion the interests of SIDS on the Council, including a close examination of the security dimension of climate change that the world is going through at the moment. The Security Council has failed. That is a fact that even the P5 should acknowledge. And its failure is most clearly seen in Israel's ongoing war of aggression in the occupied Palestine, most recently since 7th October 2023. What is most astonishing is that the Council, which is responsible for maintaining global peace and security, is refusing to call for a ceasefire. With that refusal, it is perpetuating a potentially genocidal war by the most powerful military in the Middle East against Palestinians. Over a month has now passed since the adoption of the resolution 2720, the second such Security Council resolution since the beginning of the war. The resolution was viewed as the first step towards peace and supported by many countries, including the Maldives. Over the course of the month, we have not seen a cessation of hostilities. We have not seen an end to the collective punishment imposed on the Palestinian people. We have not seen the adherence of Israel to international law and international humanitarian law. The Council needs to enforce its resolutions and universally implement its mandate, and we risk losing the faith in the United Nations system as a whole and the weakening of the multilateralism. The Council should send a clear and unmistakable message to the Middle East. The message should say to Israel to immediately and unconditionally accept and implement a ceasefire, open humanitarian corridors, release the prisoners, return to the negotiating table, and pay for the reconstruction of Gaza. The Middle East is encouraged that many powerful supporters of Israel have come out in the recent weeks and called for the establishment of an independent sovereign state of Palestine in the lands currently occupied by Israel. Such calls should also include the fact that lasting peace can only be achieved in the Middle East with the establishment of an independent state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. The Maldives welcomes South Africa's application to the International Court of Justice on 29 December 2023, requesting to declare Israel is in breach of 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. An expedited response by the court will undoubtedly enable to take urgent action against all acts and measures that are in breach of international humanitarian and international human rights law. Tension in various parts of the Middle East have also resulted in attacks including massive bombardments and substantive loss of lives. We would like to see a deeper engagement by the UN, especially the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, in promoting dialogue, mediation, and other preventive diplomacy tools. We also like to believe that DPPA and other UN agencies have accumulated a substantial amount of knowledge on conflict resolution and management in the Middle East. We call on the Council members to use such resources, for such knowledge can generate evidence on what policies and tools have worked and what have failed in preventing conflicts and in sustaining peace. That enduring conflict in the Middle East stands as a powerful symbol of the failures of this Council. The Maldives therefore urges the Council to uphold its obligation in maintaining international peace and security. We reiterate our calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and allow immediate and urgently needed humanitarian aid and assistance to the Palestinian people. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Maldives for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Poland.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to thank you for having organized this debate.
Delivered by the European Union. I would like to share some comments in my national capacity. Poland reiterates its unwavering commitment to peace and stability in the Middle East. We're strongly in favor of a robust coordination of all efforts to restore calm in the region. For this purpose, Poland will remain actively engaged in various diplomatic fora. Although the key role here is for the regional partners, we support all processes that have a potential to contribute to achieving a diplomatic solution and to improve the situation of civilian populations. In the longer term, we firmly back a viable two-state solution based on internationally agreed parameters. Mr. President, applauding the initiatives of Malta and the United Arab Emirates, we welcome the Security Council's Resolution 2712 and 2720 and call for their swift and full implementation. We extend our gratitude to all humanitarian actors, particularly UNRWA, which persist in delivering life-saving assistance to the civilians affected by the situation on the ground. Saying that, we strongly underline the need for all aid to be distributed solely by UN agencies in order to prevent its misuse by terrorist organizations. Mr. President, from the very beginning, Polish authorities at all levels have condemned Hamas' brutal attacks in the strongest possible terms. The use of innocent civilians as human shields is particularly repulsive. We consistently call for the release of all hostages without any preconditions. We are of the opinion that Israel, just like any other state, has the right to defend itself in the face of terror. Nevertheless, we emphasize that the right to self-defense must be exercised in full compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law. We strongly advocate for immediate relief to Gaza's civilian population through increased humanitarian effort. The extremely tragic situation of Gazans must be alleviated without delay. Therefore, we have increased our humanitarian aid to the Strip. Poland doubled its financial contribution to the UNRWA and provided additional funding for UNICEF and WFP operations in Gaza. Mr. President, we have been following with concern the security situation in southern Lebanon and the ongoing skirmishes between Hezbollah and IDF. In this context, we reiterate our strong support for unified actions aimed at preventing a regional spillover of the Gaza conflict. We need to encourage all sides to find a diplomatic solution that will allow for the Lebanese and Israeli to return to their homes in the areas close to the border. Now, with regard to Houthi attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea, Poland deems these actions totally unacceptable. There is no doubt that Houthi attacks pose a threat to global trade operations and increase the risk of regional escalation. Therefore, we hope that the recent Security Council Resolution 2722 will contribute to our common goal to de-escalate tensions and restore stability in the Red Sea area. Mr. President, to conclude, preventing a regional spillover and restoring calm in the Middle East is now more urgent than ever before. We believe that ending the hostilities in Gaza would facilitate the process of reaching a diplomatic solution to the situation in the region. We believe that the UN community should be able to develop a common position on this extremely important issue. Otherwise, the escalation and spreading of the conflict may have further devastating and long-lasting consequences. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. I thank the representative of Poland for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a nation committed to the promotion of peace and respect for human rights, Colombia has been working to bring together the majority of member states of this organization to demand an immediate cessation of hostilities, bringing an end to the violence and barbarity that has been spiraling in the Middle East since the beginning of October, and which to date has not let up. The escalation of violence that we have seen for more than 100 days in the Middle East poses an imminent threat to the maintenance of peace and security in the region. The vast majority of those who have died are women and children, which is absolutely unacceptable. Our national experience has shown us that violence only begets more violence and more loss of life, leaving in its wake a baleful legacy for societies, particularly young people and future generations. Colombia expresses its solidarity with all of the victims and their families. Nothing justifies attacks on civilian targets and the taking of civilian hostages. Nothing justifies the death and wounding of civilians and defenseless women and children, journalists, and the staff of the UN Agency for the Palestine refugees in the Near East. According to the Secretary General, since the 7th of October last year, 152 United Nations staff members have died in Gaza. This is the highest loss of life in the history of the organization, a staggering and disheartening fact. We note with concern the lack of water, food, and shelter in Gaza and the displacement of a high proportion of its population. It's unacceptable that they've been forced to flee their homes to move to overcrowded and cramped areas. We reiterate that the international community must strongly condemn the grave violations of international humanitarian law that we're witnessing, which have had a disproportionate effect on women, children, and other vulnerable groups. The absence of a response to the conflict between Israel and Palestine is having appalling consequences for the civilian population. It destabilizes the region and it calls into question the very meaning of life and humanity. For this reason, we reaffirm our support for a peaceful, definitive, and comprehensive settlement to the Palestinian question. This based on the two-state solution, living side by side within safe and internationally recognized borders, in accordance with the provisions of the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council, respecting human rights and international humanitarian law. The Colombian government welcomes the claim submitted by South Africa against Israel to the International Court of Justice in The Hague for the violation of various provisions of the 1948 Genocide Convention. Colombia will continue to diligently follow these proceedings and, if necessary, will, in due time, announce specific legal steps to be taken in addition to the South African case. Mr. President, Colombia recognizes and is grateful for the efforts made by various countries to stop the violence. We urge the United Nations and its member states to step up their efforts to bring about an immediate cessation of hostilities, to guarantee access for humanitarian aid to conflict-affected territories, to guarantee the immediate release of all of the hostages, and to de-escalate the violence that we have been seeing in the Middle East. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Colombia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Holy See.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
President, Pope Francis, in his recent address to members of the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See, expressed once again his deep concern about the ongoing war. He reiterated the condemnation of the 7th of October terrorist attack against the Israeli people, in which a large number of innocent persons, including women and children, were horribly wounded, tortured, and murdered, and many taken hostage. The Pope clearly stated, "I renew my condemnation of this act and of every instance of terrorism and extremism. This is not the way to resolve disputes between peoples, and once again call for the immediate liberation of all hostages held in Gaza." At the same time, Pope Francis renewed his appeal for a ceasefire on every front, including Lebanon, which would allow space for dialogue, however difficult it may be, in order to secure the release of the hostages still being held in Gaza and to facilitate the distribution of much-needed humanitarian aid. Indeed, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is of extreme gravity, affecting innocent civilians and causing unimaginable suffering, with more than 20,000 people killed and nearly 2 million people displaced. As the Holy See has already stated in its Council, it is essential to avoid an entire population paying the consequences of a heinous act of terrorism. Furthermore, any action taken in self-defense must be guided by the principle of distinction and proportionality and comply with international humanitarian law. It is deplorable that hospitals, schools, and places of worship, all of which are the last resort for those fleeing the violence in Gaza, are being used for military purposes and consequently attacked. Such military activity by all parties must cease, and these sites must be guaranteed the protection according to them under international humanitarian law. Pope Francis has therefore called for a greater effort on the part of the international community to defend and implement humanitarian law, which seems to be the only way to ensure the defense of human dignity in situations of warfare. Mr. President, in Israel and in Palestine, as in every other part of the world, every human being, be they Christian, Jewish, Muslim, of any people or religion, is sacred, precious in the eyes of God, and has the right to live in peace. The most viable solution for achieving lasting peace remains the two-state solution, with internationally guaranteed special status of the city of Jerusalem. It is vital that the international community, together with the leaders of the State of Palestine and the State of Israel, pursue such a solution with renewed determination at a time of widespread despair and hostility, so that humanity may prevail over hardness of heart. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le...
I thank the representative of the Holy See for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Argentina.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Argentina is following with extreme concern the development of the current crisis in Gaza. Argentina expresses its strongest condemnation of the terrorist attacks by Hamas that are at the root of the humanitarian disaster described by the Secretary-General. We regret that to date these acts have not been the subject of explicit condemnation by the United Nations Security Council. In this regard, Argentina recognizes Israel's right to exercise its self-defense in the context of international law, under international law, international humanitarian law. Argentina deeply laments the high cost of the conflict in terms of civilian victims, including children, women, and the elderly, as well as the destruction of basic civilian infrastructure, this according to reports of the United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross. We express our condolences to the families of the civilian victims of all nationalities who have lost their lives as a result of the current armed conflict. Argentina has always believed that everything must be done to protect the lives of innocent civilians. That's why Argentina asks for compliance without delay with the provisions of Resolution 2720 of the Security Council, so that urgent measures can be taken to ensure immediately a better, safe and unhindered humanitarian access, and to establish the conditions that lead to a sustainable cessation of hostilities. In line with the aforementioned resolution, Argentina demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages taken in the objectionable terrorist attack perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October last year, who continue to be held captive. These include Argentinian nationals from my own country who continue to suffer for themselves the consequences of that act. Argentina expresses once again its commitment for a fair and definitive peace, ending the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, this in accordance with international law and the relevant resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly and Security Council. Only through the resumption of a dialogue process based on the two-state solution, living side by side in peace and security within safe and internationally recognized borders, will it be possible to achieve lasting peace. In this context, it's urgent to renew the commitment of the international community to encourage Israelis and Palestinians to return to the negotiations table in order to achieve a peaceful, concerted solution to this conflict. Finally, my country would like to thank the Secretary-General and his team for their efforts, and we pay heartfelt tribute to international staff who, with great efforts and sacrifice, have been working on the ground. We pay particular and well-deserved tribute to those members of the United Nations staff who have lost their lives in the accomplishment of their tasks. Thank you very much, President.
I thank the representative of Argentina for this statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Chile.
Mr. President, we congratulate France for convening this open debate and for its leadership during the presidency this month. We are grateful for this opportunity because it allows us to reaffirm the importance that we grant to this issue. In this same sense, we take note of the briefing made by the Secretary-General and the other briefers. Chile promotes the two-state solution and the right of Israel and Palestine to live in harmony within safe and internationally recognized borders, with full respect for the human rights of all of their inhabitants. For this reason, we urgently appeal for full and swift compliance with the relevant resolutions that support the right of the Palestinian people to form a sovereign state. These include resolutions 181 and 242 of the General Assembly, and also those related resolutions such as Resolution 2334 of the Security Council. That resolution reaffirms that the establishment of settlements by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity and represents a flagrant violation of international law. Mr. President, Undoubtedly, the terrorist act perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October last year and the indiscriminate response of the State of Israel affecting the civilian population living in the Gaza Strip, and which has also affected the West Bank, violate the respect for the UN Charter, international law, and international humanitarian law. Added to that, we are alarmed by the repercussions of this conflict on the rest of the region. Indeed, we have seen events that are a source of deep concern to us. For this reason, we echo the call by the Secretary-General himself and by the various heads of different UN agencies, including UNRWA, the WHO, the World Food Programme and UNICEF. That was an appeal for an immediate, lasting and full ceasefire to ease the tensions. A ceasefire continues to be a priority to ensure the protection of civilians, particularly women, the elderly, and children. There is no doubt that human life must be our highest priority, and to date, this Security Council has not been able to manage this side of the situation. We underscore that there is no contradiction whatsoever between a state's self-defense or combating terrorism and respecting the lives of civilians. It simply is impermissible to attack critical civilian infrastructure, including homes, hospitals, schools, shelters, among other things. We note that full, immediate, safe, unhindered, and sustained access must be guaranteed for humanitarian aid. This includes respecting resolutions 2712 and 2720 adopted by this very body last year. We believe that all available access and transit routes for the Gaza Strip must be opened. Mr. President, violence is not resolved with more violence, and its indiscriminate use has claimed the lives of thousands of Palestinian civilians and gravely imperils the lives of the Israeli hostages that has already been made plain. Chile unequivocally condemns the acts of Hamas, just like any other terrorist act, as well as acts of violence and hostility against the civilian population. Furthermore, we demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages that continue to be held by Hamas, ensuring their well-being and their treatment in accordance with international law. We encourage all involved parties, as well as the international community, to continue to work to bring an end to this war. This will only be possible through diplomacy and dialogue. We recognize the efforts and the results achieved by friendly countries to mitigate this crisis. We bid every success to the newly appointed Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, Ms. Sigrid Kaag, and we hope that she will receive all necessary assistance to be able to accomplish her mission. Chile has always reaffirmed that one of the priorities of our foreign policy is to achieve a peaceful settlement in the Middle East. We have constantly expressed our support for a fair and lasting solution. Our commitment is linked to the fact that we are home to the largest Palestinian community outside the Middle East, who began to arrive in Chile at the beginning of the 20th century, becoming integrated into all parts of our society. Furthermore, we are home in our country to a dynamic and active Jewish community. In concluding, we wish to share that last Thursday, along with Mexico, Chile submitted a written referral to the International Criminal Court on the situation in Palestine. The aim of this was to bolster the investigation into alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Israel, crimes which fall under the Rome Statute. Since there is currently an ongoing investigation by the ICC prosecutor into the situation in Palestine, Chile's aim with this referral is to support the prosecutor in his investigation. For Chile, it's essential to shed light on the facts and responsibilities so that these situations never happen again. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Chile for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Oman.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, God peace be upon you all. Security Council convenes today yet again more than 100 days after the situation in Gaza, while it fails to take measures to stop the situation, despite the repeated calls from the international community, including the General Assembly, even the Security Council, and the Secretary General's position. The Secretary General, who we commend for his respect of the international law and international humanitarian law and upholding them. Peace-loving countries will not forget those who gave a green light to Israel to continue its aggression against the Palestinian people. We say to Israel in one voice, you need to stop this Holocaust against the Palestinian people. This project of a genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forcible displacement is not acceptable. We hold Israel, the occupying power, and all those who support Israel in committing this crime the full responsibility for this aggression that has and continues to undermine the legitimacy of the Security Council. The Security Council that we always took pride in its achievements and accomplishments in preserving and safeguarding international peace and security. This will also not undermine the determination of the Palestinian people and all countries that reject colonization. And we say that any occupation will end one day. Ending the colonization is a project that requires a lot of sacrifices, often with their blood. And this is the price that many people have paid for their dignity, independence, and freedom. We condemn the genocidal actions of Israel against the Palestinian people, and we continue to urge the Security Council to uphold its legal and ethical responsibilities, to call for a ceasefire and provide protection for the Palestinian people, provide for their humanitarian needs, and hold Israel accountable for violating the law, for violating the international law and the international humanitarian law. Its disregard of the Security Council resolutions, international resolutions that call for ending the occupation of the Palestinian territories and other Arab lands, and for Israel withdrawal to the 1967 borders in order to achieve sustainable and comprehensive peace. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Oman for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Tunisia. Mr. President, I wish to begin with a word of congratulations to France on its presidency of the Security Council during this month, and we commend you for holding this very important periodic debate. I also applaud and welcome the new and congratulate the new members of the elected members of the Council, and I cannot but extend gratitude also to the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, for his noble efforts and his repeated calls for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, more than 100 days after the outbreak of conflict, the occupying power has continued indefatigably its systematic aggression and its policy of collective punishment and genocide, targeting the fraternal Palestinian people in Gaza by destroying civilian infrastructure to heighten the suffering of the Palestinian people who have been encountering and dealing with a humanitarian disaster due to the ongoing nature of this aggression. We condemn in the firmest terms the war crimes perpetrated by the occupying power against Palestinian civilians who have systematically been killing women, children, decimating entire families, and targeting hospitals, schools, universities, as well as places of worship and even humanitarian personnel. And they use starvation and interruption of basic services as tools of war. We cannot remain silent at a time when the international community is silent and the international bodies are incapable of delivering upon their responsibilities. In this regard, Tunisia emphasizes the fact that the steadfast support to the Palestinian people constitutes a moral and legal responsibility. This is incumbent upon the international community as a whole, and therefore it is of paramount importance to step up international efforts to end the bloodletting, to end the colonization, and to ensure that the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people are achieved. The paralysis of the peace process, the ongoing deterioration of the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, these result in the fact that the approach that has been adopted by the international community vis-à-vis the Palestinian cause has remained conditioned on the repeated cycles of violence, and this has prevented the root causes from being dealt with, the root cause being the occupation. This is a reality which further complicates the situation in the region, and this has heightened the suffering of the Palestinian people at a time when people throughout the world are seeking ways to achieve development and economic growth. The Palestinian people continue to suffer under the yoke of occupation and the blockade for more than 75 years. The occupying entity has continued its aggression. Its expansionist project has been, and its flagrant violations of international law in full impunity. Tunisia emphatically denounces the double standards of policies and all attempts to place the executioner and the victim on the same footing, or attempt to liquidate the just Palestinian cause. We call for an immediate ceasefire, reiterate that call for the guarantees for the protection of civilians, for accelerated deliveries of unimpeded humanitarian assistance. We reject all attempts of forced displacement of the Palestinian people outside of their land in a flagrant violation of the principles of international law, as well as the resolutions under international law. Mr. President, Tunisia is firmly wedded to the values of justice and of law. Tunisia resolutely rejects any form of pressure and aggression. We reiterate our steadfast position of support for the fraternal Palestinian people in their resistance to the occupation and resistance to the genocide which has been targeted against them, and for the building of an independent Palestinian state with Al-Quds al-Sharif with its capital. We have spared no effort to help advance the cause of the Palestinian people in their legitimate struggle to achieve their inalienable right and to end colonization. Thank you.
Tunisie de sa déclaration.
I thank Tunisia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. Mr. President, the horrific position in Gaza and the West Bank has been described to us in graphic detail in the session that we have heard yesterday and today, would certainly place any other historical conflict known to humankind to be of incomparable intensity in the context of the grotesque manner in which the conflict is being prosecuted by the parties to the conflict, encouraged, of course, by third parties who appear to have little concern for humanity, but simply driven by the greed for global dominance and to satisfy their collateral agendas. We heard the Secretary General yesterday, who told us of the untold suffering and trauma of the Palestinian people and of the family members of the hostages, including those families who lost a family member to the terror of the 7th. Mr. President, it is said that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. My delegation does not intend to add more to this tragic narrative. Instead, we would silently wish and pray that sanity that we humans are said to be blessed with will sooner than later prevail. My delegation would therefore seek to appeal to the higher beings in all of us present here at this Security Council meeting by leaving you with a few lines which I have said before from a verse from Rabbi Sheila Weinberg, a community relations professional, titled Two Peoples, One Land. In her zest for peace in the Middle East, a plea worthy of contemplation, and I think it captures what should be the true ethos if we are to achieve a true and lasting peace. It goes thus: two peoples, one land, three faiths, one root, one earth, one mother, one sky, one beginning, one future, one destiny, one broken heart, one God. We pray, she says, that we be granted a vision of unity. May you, the life of all the worlds, source of all amazing differences, help us to see clearly, guide us gently and firmly towards each other, towards peace. As she puts it, Let us all breathe together, breathe life to all that we do to alleviate the suffering of those suffering due to this terrible conflict. Mr. President, in the context of the escalation of aggression in Palestine, it is important that we convey a message to all parties involved in the conflict, that we promote empathy, we promote understanding, and plead for a peaceful resolution of the conflict. We understand that the current situation is tense and filled with pain and suffering. We urge all parties to prioritize dialogue, empathy, and the pursuit of peaceful solutions, that it is critical to recognize the value of human lives and the importance of finding common ground. Mr. President, it is important to note that dialogue and empathy alone may not resolve all aspects of the complex conflict in Palestine. However, they provide a foundation, we say, for peaceful negotiations and create a conducive environment. That violence alone perpetuates a cycle of destruction and hinders progress towards a just and lasting peace. That we encourage all parties to engage in constructive dialogue, listen to each other's concerns, and work towards a negotiated settlement that respects the rights and aspirations of all people involved. Mr. President, we know that trust building is crucial in the dialogue process, as it creates a safe and open environment, fosters understanding, builds confidence in the process, and facilitates cooperation and collaboration and sustains dialogue over time. Without trust, Mr. President, effective and meaningful dialogue becomes challenging, hindering progress towards a peaceful solution. Mr. President, peace cannot be kept by force. I say this again. Peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. That our clarion call today is for an immediate ceasefire and for all parties to respect international humanitarian law, ensuring the protection of civilians and the provision of necessary aid and support. It is through dialogue and dialogue alone, understanding and a commitment to peaceful coexistence that we can build a future where all can thrive in dignity and security. Sri Lanka's long-held principal position on this matter has been clear. We recognize the legitimate and inalienable rights of the people of Palestine to statehood. Sri Lanka remains committed to supporting a just and comprehensive negotiated political settlement to the Palestinian issue in line with the relevant UN resolutions leading to two states living side by side based on the 1967 borders. Sri Lanka also, which is the chair of the UN Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices, and continues to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian cause and affirms the rights of the Palestinian people to live in peace and dignity alongside their Israeli brothers and sisters. Mr. President, finally, our plea today to our brothers and sisters of Palestine and Israel is that they must come together as members of one human family, put aside their differences, and strive for a future of peace, justice, and prosperity for all in Palestine and in Israel. That the members of this Security Council, as trustees, I remind ourselves, as trustees of global stability and security, and as pledged in the Charter of the United Nations, must do everything possible and must do everything that it takes to facilitate a peaceful resolution of this conflict that we cannot be heard to pass on to future generations. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Sri Lanka for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
L'essentiel, c'est que M. Attaf soit présent. Tout est réglé entre la France et l'Algérie, il n'y a pas de zéro divergence sur rien.
Yes, I see.